Hello, I'm Dr. Frances Pitzilis. Forgiveness or not forgiving does affect your health. Haven't you often heard on the television that the family come out of the courthouse and say, "We've forgiven the killer"? Well, why would they be doing that? It's not going to help the killer, is it? It's actually being done to help them to cope better with their grief. You see, holding on to anger, hurt, and grief is bad for you. And when people are letting go and forgiving, they're actually doing themselves a big, big favour. So, in everyday life, we're not going to have too many killers, are we? But we're more likely to suffer at the hands of our friends and colleagues. And common offences will include betrayals of trust, rejections, lies and insults. But that's going to be more of an everyday thing. And how we cope with that can really make the difference. You see, if you're really, really hurt, that damages your health. For one, it affects your stress system and affects your hormones. We've found that people with lingering resentment and lingering grief and not getting over traumas and tragedies and betrayals are more likely to get anxiety and depression. They're more likely to have heart attack, blood pressure, or premature death. They're more likely to have a suppressed immune system because it's been measured that they have fewer killer cells, and killer cells are part of your immune system that kill viruses and cancer. And anything that follows on from stress, like irritable bowel, pain, muscle tension, fatigue, and infectious illnesses can be affected by this. Now, I'd like to tell you about some research that was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry in 2001. And they were relating to the reader about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission findings in South Africa after the apartheid finished. And they studied 134 people who were participating, and all of them were victims of gross human rights violations. And these included personal abuse, witnessing the abuse of a family member, witnessing the killing or torture of a family member, severe ill treatment, abduction, and witnessing the disappearance of a family member without return. There were also things like police detention, raids on property, and property damage. And amongst those 134 people, there were multiple traumas in each person. Now, of those people studied, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission found that 63% had a mental illness. The most frequent diagnosis was depression in 55%. And that was followed by post-traumatic stress disorder in 42%, then anxiety disorder in 27%. And there was a high rate of multiple diagnoses. Further analysis showed that there was a higher rate of mental illness amongst those who could not forgive. And the researchers concluded that lack of forgiveness carried with it a higher rate of mental illness. So, what happens when you're hurt? Well, when you're hurting, you can rehearse painful memories and go over them and harbour grudges. This can fuel negative emotions, and then you get the physiological responses that follow on from those emotions. When people hold a grudge, they stay in the victim role, and that perpetuates the negative emotions as well. Some people will hold on to this to save face, but there may be other reasons, like perhaps finding a way of feeling a sense of control. And that's because lack of control causes stress. However, When you're nursing a grudge, it means that you're committing to staying angry or hurt or both, and all the negative effects that go from that. On the other hand, if you can possibly try to feel some sort of empathy with that person, however hard it might be, even if it's understanding that that person is flawed and that it's part of them being flawed, or that they're not well, or they're sick, or whatever way you can possibly move on, forgive. And part of that is trying to understand where they were coming from. Perhaps they had a bad upbringing, perhaps they were victims themselves. And researchers have found that empathy reduces the stress response and heart risk as well. Now, forgiving doesn't mean that you forget what happened. You don't forget what happened, you just forgive and move on. You try and form an understanding of the motivations or what may have been behind the way that you were treated, but you don't forget. You don't have to forget. And empathy and forgiveness helps relationships in general run more smoothly. Being able to understand where someone's coming from does mean that you don't tend to get as much resentment, grief, or harbouring grudges. Now, to end, I'd like to give you some quotes from some famous people about forgiveness. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that that prisoner was you. Lewis Smedes. Always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. Oscar Wilde. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. Mahatma Gandhi. Forgiveness does not change the past, but it does enlarge the future. Paul Boes. Forgiveness is the sweetest revenge. Isaac Friedman. Life is an adventure in forgiveness. Dr. Norman Cousins. Forgiveness is a virtue of the brave. Indira Gandhi. Anger makes you smaller, while forgiveness forces you to grow beyond what you were. Sherry Carter Scott. So, to forgive makes you strong.